There are stories that are too dark to be passed down in history books. Secrets buried not just in graves, but in basements, hidden away from the world. Tonight's story is one of those tales. Imagine a lonely farmhouse, miles away from the nearest town, surrounded by woods so thick that screams would never carry beyond the trees. In that house lived a family bound not by love, but by blood in the most twisted way possible. They were inbred, generation after generation, and the horror they created behind closed doors was something no one dared to speak about. But hidden beneath the rotting floorboards of that farmhouse was a locked door. And behind that door was a woman, kept not as a wife chosen by love, but as a cousin forced into marriage. For years she endured silence, darkness, and torment, until one night she tried to escape. What happened next would leave investigators shaken and the community forever haunted. This is the story of the cousin wife who was kept in the basement, a story of bloodlines that should have ended long ago, but instead festered into something unspeakable. And it all began with one family determined to keep their name and their secrets hidden in the shadows. The farmhouse stood on the edge of an isolated valley in rural Appalachia, far removed from paved roads and modern conveniences. Locals knew of it, but few dared to venture close. Stories circulated for decades, whispers of a family that never mingled with the outside world, a bloodline that twisted inward upon itself until its descendants no longer looked or acted quite human. The house itself seemed to reflect their decay. Sagging roof beams, broken windows covered with rotting boards, and an odor that neighbors swore carried on the wind like something dead beneath the soil. Children in nearby towns were warned never to stray too far into the woods, for they might stumble upon the cursed ones. The family's history was murky, intentionally obscured. Census records contained gaps. Marriage licenses were non-existent. What little could be pieced together hinted at cousins marrying cousins, sisters wed to brothers, and children born into a cycle that blurred the lines between relative and spouse. Locals believed the family had erased their own trail, burning documents, hiding graves, and ensuring their name disappeared from history. What remained was a legacy passed down in rumors, strange figures glimpsed at dusk, pale and misshapen, watching silently from the tree line before slipping back into the dark. By the late 1970s, reports began to surface that hinted at something more sinister than inbreeding. Hunters claimed they heard screams from beneath the farmhouse at night, muffled but unmistakable. A drifter passing through the valley swore he saw a young woman at a basement window, her face pale and desperate, before a figure pulled her back into the darkness. The police investigated once, but their reports were vague. No arrests, no names, just an official statement that nothing unusual had been found. The whispers only grew louder after that. What most didn't realize was that inside that basement, a woman lived in perpetual confinement. She wasn't a stranger brought in from outside. She was family, a cousin forced into marriage by the head of the household, then hidden away like a possession. To the family, this was tradition, a way to preserve their twisted bloodline. To her, it was a nightmare without end, and with every passing year, she clung to the thought of escape, even as the world forgot she existed. The first real hint that something was deeply wrong came in the summer of 1981, when a teenage boy from a neighboring town vanished. He had gone hiking with friends near the valley, but never returned. His friends swore they saw him leave the trail, chasing what looked like a girl, waving for help in the distance. They called after him, but he disappeared into the thick woods. Hours turned to days, and search parties combed the forest with dogs and flashlights, but the boy was never found. What unsettled the volunteers most was the discovery of faint footprints leading toward the old farmhouse. Prints that abruptly stopped, as though swallowed by the earth. The sheriff's office conducted a search of the property, knocking on the warped wooden door while the family peered out from cracked shutters. The men who lived there were pale, broad-shouldered, with faces that seemed uneven, one eye slightly higher than the other, jaws too heavy for their skulls. They spoke in broken, almost childlike sentences, insisting they had seen no one. The sheriff looked around but noticed the strange silence. No birds, no livestock, just the faint smell of rot wafting from the cellar doors. The basement, when asked about, was said to be storage only. The family refused to let anyone inside. With no proof, the officers left, but unease spread through the search party. Later that week, 2 hunters camped near the valley swore they heard banging sounds at night. They described it as desperate pounding, followed by muffled cries, like someone trying to break free. When they approached the farmhouse the next morning, they noticed a small basement window had been freshly boarded up. Something, or someone, had been trying to get out. The missing boy's family never got closure. The case went cold within months, and whispers around town took on a sharper edge. People began to avoid the woods entirely, saying the cursed family had taken him, that the boy's curiosity had cost him his life. But no one dared confront the farmhouse again. In rural Appalachia, sometimes silence is the only way to survive. By the mid-1980s, the family living in the farmhouse had become more legend than fact, their name erased from records and rarely spoken aloud in town. But for those who had seen them up close, the memory was impossible to forget. Witnesses described their faces in hushed tones, uneven eyes that never quite aligned, lips swollen and cracked, foreheads bulging as though bones had grown the wrong way. Their speech was a strange mix of slurred Appalachian dialect and broken words, almost childlike, as if their minds had never fully developed. Yet beneath that vacant look was something unsettling, an intelligence that was feral, watchful, and dangerous. The patriarch, a man only known locally as Earl, was said to be the one who kept control. His shoulders were massive, his face broad and heavy, with a single cloudy eye that drifted toward his temple. Earl rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried finality, as though no one dared oppose him. It was Earl who arranged the family's marriages, pairing cousins with cousins, daughters with uncles, justifying it as tradition. To him, outsiders were a threat, but blood bound them together, no matter how twisted that bond became. The women of the house were rarely seen. When they did appear, usually to fetch supplies from a traveling vendor, they were described as ghost-like figures with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to hold unbearable sadness. One in particular, a young woman barely past her teens, drew attention. Locals whispered she was Earl's cousin wife, forced into the role against her will. Unlike the others, she looked different, not fully broken yet, as though she still remembered what freedom felt like. Her appearances were brief, her head bowed, and her arms covered in bruises that no one dared ask about. It was later learned that she had been locked away in the basement for most of her life. She was Earl's possession, hidden from sight when anyone came near. For her, the farmhouse wasn't home. It was a prison. The others enforced her captivity, feeding her scraps, watching her with blank faces as though they couldn't comprehend her pain. And though she was family by blood, she was treated as less than human. Behind those locked doors, her silent rebellion grew. Night after night, she scratched at the basement walls, whispered to herself about escape, and dreamed of a life beyond the valley. What she didn't know was that the walls around her carried more secrets than even she could imagine. In 1987, a group of local teenagers dared each other to sneak near the farmhouse one autumn night. The town was small, entertainment scarce, and legends of the cousin wife in the basement had become a twisted kind of folklore. With only flashlights and nerves sharpened by fear, they crept through the woods, their laughter fading as the silhouette of the decaying house rose before them. The structure looked almost alive, its rotting timbers groaning under the weight of time. One boy, braver than the rest, approached the side of the house and found the cellar doors chained shut. But there was something odd. Claw-like scratches carved deep into the wood, as if someone had tried to dig their way out. The teens exchanged uneasy glances, suddenly realizing the stories weren't just tales to scare children. Before they could retreat, they heard it, a faint noise, soft at first, then unmistakable. It was the sound of someone crying. Terrified, they scrambled closer, pressing their ears against the warped boards. The sobbing was real, desperate, and coming from beneath their feet. A voice, barely audible, whispered, "Help me." Panic surged through the group. Some wanted to run, but the boy with the flashlight peered through a small crack in the cellar door. For a brief second, he swore he saw an eye staring back, pale, wide, and filled with hopelessness. Then, just as suddenly, it vanished, pulled into darkness by unseen hands. The group fled in terror, swearing never to return. Yet rumors of what they saw spread quickly, fueling the town's unease. Parents began to forbid their children from venturing near the valley, and whispers grew louder that the family was hiding something horrific. One of the teens later confided in his father, who quietly passed the story along to a local pastor. The pastor, concerned but cautious, visited the farmhouse days later. He claimed the Fateson, Millie, met him at the door, their deformed faces blank and expressionless. Earl stood behind them, his one cloudy eye fixed on the pastor with a silent warning. When the pastor asked to pray with them, Earl simply said, "No need. God don't come here." And with that, the door slammed shut. Behind those doors, the cousin wife remained in darkness, her cries for help swallowed by the walls of her prison. But her spirit was not broken. For the first time, she realized outsiders had heard her. And with that came the first spark of hope. By the late 1980s, law enforcement could no longer ignore the growing number of strange reports surrounding the farmhouse. Another hiker had gone missing, and neighbors swore they heard inhuman cries echoing through the valley at night. Finally, a deputy was sent to investigate. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. The deputy approached cautiously, the farmhouse looming like a rotting corpse against the tree line. Earl met him at the door, his massive frame blocking the entry. When the deputy asked to look around, Earl refused, muttering about family business. But as the deputy turned to leave, he caught something strange, a faint sound beneath the floorboards. It was rhythmic, thumping, scratching, almost like someone moving below ground. Earl noticed the deputy's pause, and in that instant, his cloudy eye flicked with a warning that chilled him to the bone. Determined, the deputy returned that night with a flashlight and crept around the property alone. At the back of the house, he found the cellar doors. The chains were old, rusty, but secured tightly. He leaned down, listening closely, and heard it again. Muffled cries. He whispered through the cracks, asking if anyone was there. To his shock, a weak female voice replied, "Please, get me out." His blood ran cold. Before he could act, heavy footsteps thundered above. The deputy scrambled back as the cellar doors shook violently from the inside. Bang, 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 like someone being dragged away. Then silence. The next morning, the deputy returned with reinforcements, but when they forced their way into the basement, it was nearly empty. Nearly. Against one wall, etched into the stone with fingernails, were words, "Help me. My name is Sarah." But Sarah was no stranger. Town records, long buried, revealed she was Earl's cousin, reported missing over a decade earlier. She had vanished as a teenager, only to be kept alive as his wife, hidden in the basement all those years. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community, but by the time investigators dug deeper, the family had vanished. The farmhouse was abandoned, the cellar stripped bare, and Sarah was nowhere to be found. It was as though Earl and his brood had melted back into the woods, taking their darkest secret with them. The search for Sarah didn't end with the farmhouse raid. Weeks later, strange reports trickled in from the outskirts of the valley. A farmer swore he saw a barefoot woman staggering across his property at dawn, her hair tangled, her dress torn. When he called out, she bolted into the woods like a frightened animal. Days after, a driver on a back road nearly hit a figure who lurched into his headlights, thin, pale, and hollow-eyed. But when he stopped to help, the woman vanished into the trees. Whispers spread quickly. Sarah was alive, trying to escape. But if she was free, she wasn't safe. Locals claimed they saw Earl and his sons prowling the woods at night with lanterns, their hulking shadows moving silently between the trees. To them, Sarah wasn't just family. She was property. Her escape was a betrayal that could not be forgiven. One night, a hunter camping near the ridge reported hearing something that froze his blood. First came the sound of heavy footsteps, then low, guttural voices. He peered through the brush and saw Earl dragging a woman by the arm, her legs weak, her mouth gagged. Behind them, two deformed sons carried ropes and chains. The hunter swore. Sarah looked directly at him, her eyes wide with terror, before Earl yanked her back into the dark. The man fled, too afraid to intervene. Law enforcement organized another search, but the family knew the woods better than anyone. The valleys and hollows were riddled with caves and old mine shafts, places where screams could vanish without a trace. For every lead, there was only silence. It was as if the forest itself swallowed Sarah whole. Some believe she died in those woods, her body hidden in a shallow grave, never to be found. Others insist she survived, running deeper into the wilderness until she became a ghost of herself, living, feral, and unseen. But one chilling possibility remained, that Earl bade her back to the basement, sealing her fate once more behind locked doors and silence. What is certain is this: Sarah's escape attempt set in motion a chain of fear that still grips the valley to this day. And those who whisper about her say her cries can still be heard if you stand too close to the ruins of the old farmhouse. The farmhouse is gone now, reduced to rubble after a suspicious fire gutted it in the late 1990s. Officially, it was declared an accident caused by faulty wiring. But locals whisper it was Earl himself, or one of his sons, torching the place to erase the last traces of their shame. What the fire didn't destroy, time and silence buried. The family scattered, their descendants hiding under new names, slipping into nearby towns, as if trying to blend in with the world they had once rejected. Yet no matter how far they ran, the valley kept its scars. Hunters still report hearing strange wails in the distance, faint but desperate, as if a woman's voice is calling from beneath the earth. Some insist Sarah's spirit lingers there, trapped forever in the basement where her life was stolen. Others believe she never died at all, that she lived long enough to tell her story to someone who swore to keep it hidden, waiting for the right time to reveal the truth. Police records remain frustratingly incomplete. Reports of missing women, unexplained fires, and sightings of disfigured children span decades. But whenever investigators pressed the locals for answers, they were met with silence, evasive stares, or simple warnings. Leave it alone. Some things aren't meant to be dug up. Even today, no official case file bears the full truth of Sarah's disappearance. It's as if someone, perhaps the family, perhaps the entire town, worked to erase her from history. For YouTubers, journalists, and horror seekers who've tried to document the case, the valley is a graveyard of unfinished stories. Hard drives vanish, interviews are canceled, and leads dry up overnight. The family name, once whispered with fear, has been scrubbed clean. To outsiders, it's just another forgotten hollow in Appalachia. But to those who live there, it's a cursed ground, a reminder that some families don't just die out. They bury their sins, generation after generation, until the truth itself is locked away like a prisoner in the dark. So if you ever drive through the back roads of West Virginia and see an abandoned foundation crumbling into the weeds, don't stop. Don't listen for the cries, and whatever you do, don't go looking for Sarah, because what you find might not let you leave.